Guy Laliberte stood in Los Angeles in 1987 with every dollar the company owned already spent and zero money to get his troupe back to Canada. Either the crowd in that festival tent would erupt or 40 performers would be stranded on American soil, broke, 3,000 miles from home. That was the bet, not a calculated risk with a contingency plan neatly filed in a drawer. A pure, final, all-or-nothing wager from a 27-year-old former fire eater who had spent the previous decade sleeping on park benches in London and busking for coins in European alleyways. Guy Laliberte had built something that the entertainment world had never seen before, and now he was about to find out if the world wanted it or if the dream would collapse in a California parking lot with no bus fare home. Guy Laliberte was born on September 2, 1959 in Quebec City, Canada, into a middle-class family where his parents, his father a corporate executive, his mother a nurse, had mapped out a sensible future for their son involving university and a professional career. That future evaporated the first time they took young Guy to a Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circus passing through town. Something locked into place watching those performers defy gravity and logic under the big top, and no amount of parental expectation could unlock it afterward. By high school, he was organizing his own performance events. By the time he was 17, he had mastered the accordion and the harmonica well enough to earn money on street corners. At 18, in 1977, he made the decision that defined everything. He packed 2 accordions, a mouth organ, a set of spoons, a Jew's harp, and less than $1,000 in his pocket, and he hitchhiked across Europe. His first night in London, he slept on a public bench at the corner of Hyde Park. He ate what he could afford, which was rarely enough, and he performed wherever crowds gathered, outside train stations, in tourist squares, along cobblestone alleyways near major attractions. He was lean on cash and rich in experience, living hand-to-mouth across France, Spain, and the UK, learning fire eating and stilt walking from sidewalk showmen he met along the way. He worked for small change, enough to pay for the basics and keep moving. What he was accumulating was not savings, but a complete education in the art of commanding an audience with nothing but a body, a skill, and sheer force of will. When he finally returned to Quebec, he briefly accepted a full-time job at a hydroelectric dam, the kind of steady employment his parents had hoped would anchor him. 3 days into the job, the plant workers went on strike. Guy walked out and swore he would never again work a normal job. It was not a crisis, it was a release. But what happened next would set the stage for the most audacious gamble in the history of live entertainment. Back in Quebec, Guy linked up with fellow street performer Gilles Stécroix and began organizing La Fête Foraine, a summer street arts fair in the small city of Baie-Saint-Paul. They recruited jugglers, fire breathers, acrobats, and stilt walkers, staging shows that drew real crowds. The operation grew, summer by summer, into something resembling a professional troupe. In 1983, the Quebec government offered a significant arts grant to celebrate the 450th anniversary of Jack Cartier's discovery of Canada. To win the grant, Stécroix performed a publicity stunt that became legend. He walked 56 miles from Baie-Saint-Paul to Quebec City on stilts. The stunt worked. The partners secured a $1.5 million government grant and used it to create and launch Le Grand Tour du Cirque du Soleil. On June 16, 1984, Cirque du Soleil opened beneath a blue and yellow big top that seated 800 people. The show was built around an idea so simple and so radical that competitors had overlooked it entirely. A circus with no animal acts and no star performers, only human bodies, original music, theatrical storytelling, and acrobatic feats that blurred the line between sport and art. Here's where Guy Laliberte's method became unstoppable. First, he eliminated every element of traditional circus that audiences were beginning to distrust. By 1984, growing public concern over animal welfare had begun eroding affection for lion tamers and elephant parades. While every established circus doubled down on its animal acts, Guy went the opposite direction and banned them entirely. This was not compromise, it was a complete redefinition of the form. Competitors could not replicate it because their entire infrastructure, their performers, their contracts, their tent layouts were built around the old model. Guy had no legacy infrastructure to protect, which meant he could build from zero in exactly the direction audiences were already quietly moving. The result was a circus that could sell to parents who refused to take their children to animal shows, a market no competitor was chasing at all. Second, he treated every show as a theatrical production rather than a variety program. Traditional circuses presented disconnected acts, the clown segment, the tightrope segment, the trapeze segment, with no narrative thread connecting them. Guy insisted on original music scores, continuous plot lines, unified costume design, and lighting built to cinematic standards. This required hiring directors, composers, choreographers, and costume designers with backgrounds in theater and dance, not circus. The production cost was higher, but the result was a show that critics could review as art, which meant free coverage in newspapers and magazines that had never written a single word about a circus in their history. That editorial coverage was worth more than any advertising budget. Third, he maintained full creative and ownership control at every stage of growth. When casino mogul Steve Wynn approached Guy in 1992 to bring Cirque to Las Vegas, Guy demanded something almost no performer in that era could get away with demanding: full creative control of the show and zero ownership stakes surrendered to Wynn. No exclusive venue contract. He would perform at Treasure Island, but Cirque remained entirely his. Mystère opened in 1993 and sold out every ticket in its first year. Because there was no exclusivity clause, Guy then walked into negotiations with every other major Las Vegas resort from a position of complete leverage. The show that Wynn had hoped to lock up became the template for 7 separate Vegas productions that Guy controlled entirely. Fourth, he priced his shows as premium experiences at a time when circus tickets were cheap commodity entertainment. The average ticket price Guy charged was far above what any competing circus dared to ask, which initially seemed like a risk. In practice, it was a signal. Premium price communicated premium experience before a single audience member took their seat. It also meant Cirque could invest heavily in production quality and still turn profit at lower attendance rates than competitors required. Vegas shows eventually reached a 97% sellout rate, generating 60% of Cirque's total annual revenues from a handful of permanent productions rather than the grueling economics of constant touring. Fifth, he scaled by creating simultaneous shows instead of replacing old ones. After the 1987 Los Angeles success opened the American market, some members of the troupe argued for consolidating, resting, and developing one new show slowly. Guy overruled them and pushed to run the existing show while building a second, then a third, then a touring division alongside permanent residencies. Competitors who had operated on the single show model for decades could not match this rate of expansion without the artistic infrastructure Guy had spent years building. The gap widened with every new production, until Cirque operated 19 shows across 271 cities on every continent except Antarctica. This combination was devastating to traditional circus operators. They were still cycling one show through one city while Guy was building a global entertainment company with permanent homes in Las Vegas, Orlando, and eventually every major entertainment market in the world. And that's when everything tilted on the edge of a knife. By 1987, 3 years after the first show, Cirque du Soleil had earned a devoted Canadian audience but had not cracked the American market. And without American audiences, the company could not reach the scale Guy believed it was capable of. The first full tour season had returned only a modest $40,000 profit on $1.5 million invested. The second season had ended $500,000 in the red. The blue and yellow big top had collapsed on the very first day of the inaugural show, and the early months had been defined by tent problems, crowd problems, and the daily financial pressure of keeping 40 performers fed and housed while moving a full circus operation across Quebec province. The company had survived on conviction and on the particular brand of courage that only operates when there is no comfortable alternative. But survival was not the same as success, and Guy knew the difference. If that wasn't enough, Cirque faced a structural problem that threatened to kill it slowly regardless of artistic quality: Canadian winters. The show was built for outdoor, big-top performance, which meant it went dark every year for months. A company that went dark for months every year was a company bleeding salary costs and losing momentum. To survive financially, Cirque had to find a way to perform year-round, which meant heading south into the American market. And heading into the American market required a performance venue that would establish the brand with American critics and American audiences simultaneously. The Los Angeles Arts Festival was that venue. It was also in 1987 the only shot available. Guy made the decision. They would go to Los Angeles and spend everything they had to get there and to set up. Every dollar Guy personally owned, every dollar in the company account. He deliberately left no emergency reserve for return travel because he believed that removing the option of failure would focus every person in the troupe on the only outcome that mattered. If the show did not work, there was no cash for gas to come home. 40 performers would be stranded in California with no company left to return to. What he did next changed the trajectory of entertainment history. The show went up in Los Angeles. The crowds arrived. American audiences who had never experienced anything like Cirque du Soleil, the theatrical lighting, the original live music, the acrobatics woven into a storyline, the complete absence of the animal acts and barking ringmasters they associated with circus, responded with exactly the kind of eruption Guy had wagered on. Critics wrote about it. Word spread. The Los Angeles Arts Festival performance sold out. American touring dates followed: San Diego, Santa Monica, city after city. The troupe had the money to go home. More importantly, they had the credibility to never need to go home in the same way again. The American market had opened, and Cirque du Soleil would never again be a regional Canadian act. What followed was an expansion that compressed decades of normal entertainment industry growth into a handful of years. Cirque returned from Los Angeles and immediately ran 2 shows simultaneously rather than resting, the old show touring while a new production went into development. By 1990, they mounted their first European tour. In 1992, Steve Wynn approached Guy about Las Vegas. In 1993, Mystère opened at Treasure Island and sold out every seat. In 1998, a second permanent Vegas show, O, opened at the Bellagio, a production performed in, on, and above a pool of water that became one of the most celebrated theatrical productions in the city's history. By 2000, Guy bought out co-founder Daniel Gauthier and became the sole controlling owner of what was by then an organization with activities on 5 continents. He pledged $100 million of his personal fortune in 2007 to establish the One Drop Foundation, providing clean water access globally. In 2009, he became the first Canadian space tourist, paying approximately $35 million to launch on the Soyuz SMA-TMA-16 spacecraft. He had gone from sleeping on a Hyde Park bench with 2 accordions and less than $1,000 in his pocket to riding a rocket. By the time Guy sold 90% of Cirque du Soleil to TPG Capital, Fosun Capital Group, and the Caisse de dépôt et de placement du Québec in 2015, the company was valued at approximately $1.5 billion. He retained a 10% minority stake and the title of creative advisor. 5 years later, he sold that final 10% for $75 million. The company he had launched with a $1.5 million government grant, a collapsing tent, and 40 performers who had no budget to get home from Los Angeles had become the largest theatrical production company in the world. 100 million people across 300 cities on 6 continents had watched something Guy Laliberte had imagined. The former fire eater who slept on a Hyde Park bench at 18 carried one principle through every phase of building what became a global empire. The absence of a safety net is not a liability. It is the only honest way to find out if you actually believe in what you are doing. Every time Guy had removed the escape route, leaving Europe with almost nothing, quitting the hydroelectric plant after 3 days, loading a circus onto trucks for Los Angeles without keeping return fare, the pressure had produced clarity instead of paralysis. The $1.5 billion sale was not the proof that the bet had worked. The proof was the night in Los Angeles in 1987, when the lights went up on a tent full of strangers who had never seen anything like this before and chose, without any hesitation, to believe in it completely.